Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining our webinar on market access and entry regulations within the UK, being part of our Desire internationalization services. My name is Lisa Maria Katolnik. I work as EU Project Manager with ICS, the Internationalisation Center Styria, and I will guide you through the next hour. To begin with, some important information for you. If you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask them during the presentation. You can use the chat function on the right side of the screen for that matter. Furthermore, not only will the webinar be recorded, but you will also get all the presentations afterwards. And last but not least, in case of technical issues, a colleague of mine can be reached directly via the chat. So before giving you a short insight into our internationalization strategy tackling the UK market, let me introduce and welcome today's speaker, Omar Butt. Mr. Butt is co-founder and CEO of Vita Healthcare Solutions. They're offering outcome-focused consultancy for healthcare innovators. And he currently serves as the global lead for market access at the National Institute for Health and Care Research, the NIHR in London. He's a market access expert, an academic and lecturer, and he will enlighten us in short on how and what to consider when entering the UK market. Welcome, Omar, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Lisa. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope I can offer some assistance today.
Perfect, great, thank you. So maybe some words on our project. What is Desire? Desire stands for Development of e-health Solutions Improving Resilience in Europe. And what we want to achieve with this project is help SMEs address the challenges they face when accessing European e-health and digital health markets. So the project aims especially on supporting them in their innovation and internationalization processes, which brings me directly to our internationalization strategy. This strategy we drafted in 2023 aims at connecting European entities with entities in the UK and the United Arab Emirates. And after an in-depth analysis, we defined the following main goals for it. So we want to advance internationalization of SMEs in those third markets. We want to support you in finding cooperation partners there, like suppliers or distributors. We intend to identify global trends and prepare you to enter those markets, help you and assist you to acquire knowledge and capacities in the selected markets. And we plan on doing an in-depth analysis of these target markets with the help of experts. Now, what do we offer you in concrete with respect to the United Kingdom? We offer you, first of all, 2 webinars. One takes place today on market access and entry. And then we plan for April, beginning of April, an intercultural training.
Sorry, you are muted. I don't hear anything.
Okay.
I do hear you, so perhaps it might be a problem with the gentleman speakers.
Ah, okay, perfect. That's good. It's good to know. So maybe, I don't know, maybe you have problems with your headphones. Could you check that, please? Or
It's okay now. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Great to hear. So as I said, we offer you 2 webinars in preparation for the Desire Trade Mission. One today on market access and entry, and one on intercultural training, which will take place beginning of April. Concerning the Desire Trade Mission, this mission will lead us from April 23rd to April 25th to London. As I said, we have a very interesting program, and we will visit on the one hand the Digital Healthcare Show. Together we have a B2B event planned and a networking reception and much more. So if you're interested and not yet registered, you still have time for that until March 22. And you can do it via the link you see in the presentation. So as I do not want to steal our speaker any more time, let me directly hand over to Omar Butt, our expert in the UK. So Omar, the floor is yours. I will stop mine.
Should work like this. Lisa, will you let me know when we are sharing the full deck as before? And we should go like...
I cannot see it yet.
No, that's fine. I just have to make sure I move this window down. I should be able to get this like last.
It worked before, so.
Yes, it did. It did. I have high hopes that we'll get this work. I am doing what I did last time. That's all I can say. Share another window. This should work. There we go. Excellent.
Now it's working.
Yeah,
Perfect.
fabulous. I got there eventually. Excellent stuff. Right. Well, I'll dive straight into this so I don't waste anybody's time. Thank you for the lovely introduction. I will skip mine, therefore, on the slides, and I'll give you a quick overview of what we're going to do. Today, what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the challenges of adoption of technology within the UK and the UK's capability and the innovation ecosystem that they've developed in order to overcome those challenges. Then we're going to look at how that's valuable for you, not just in entering the UK, but also in creating a global brand. Fairly straightforward at this point. Again, about my background, or a bit more to add, I did start my career in industry. So I have spent a good part of 10 to 15 years selling directly to the NHS, multiple different types of innovation. And from that, I have an on-the-ground knowledge of the types of challenges that you'll face. And as part of today's presentation, I'm going to try and give you insight, not just into the requirements to enter the UK market, but some of the strategies and techniques you may want to use in order to overcome some of the typical barriers that the health system puts in place. So, a quick overview for you to figure out how the NHS is funded, just to give you an idea of how the money flows, which is always useful in understanding market access. So currently, this image is slightly outdated. NHS funding in total is around 180 billion, with about 152 billion going directly to NHS England. The gap in the 50 to 80 billion is now covered by public health funding and some capital expenditure on buildings. Public health is what we might refer to as the UK's attempt at a policy level to tackle population health. It looks at vaccines and other types of preventative measures to reduce healthcare demand, health system demand. The truth is we're not very good at it so far, and often the money isn't spent particularly well. And therefore the NHS is now taking charge of more and more population health considerations, looking at more and more preventative measures, and that is funded from the 152 odd billion that goes to them. That money is divided into primary, secondary and tertiary care. Primary care, or the family doctor, receives a fairly large sum, around 80 billion or 90 billion now, and that covers the day-to-day interactions that individuals have with their family doctor, the diagnostics that are requested at that level, and also some referral fee into secondary care. Secondary care takes the remaining funds and uses it to provision services annually. It has a budget based on a block payment predominantly, from which it has to provide a pre-agreed set of services. So, for instance, let's say within a particular area that is funded, referred to them as the ICS, previously known as the CCG, we have 2.5 million odd patients. a report will be performed just before the commencement of the year to understand the level of diabetes services that secondary care needs to provide, and that will be funded directly from that ICS pot. What does this look like, or what does this result in? Lots and lots of very, very small pots of money, not a central buyer. That challenge means that scaling within the UK needs to be considered, and it needs to be strategized in a way that tackles these small pots of money and ultimately the variability in which healthcare is provided up and down the country. To tackle this challenge, the UK has instigated something called the integrated care system, replacing what was previously known as the CCGs, the clinical commissioning groups. The integrated care system is responsible for approximately 2.5 million people and manages funding for that cohort. It funds primary and secondary care, as well as arranges for the provision of tertiary care, which is mental health and specialist services like cancer, within the location, and ensures that there is an adequate provision of services depending on the makeup of the cohort. So what barriers are you going to face because of the way in which the UK is set up? Let's have a look through some of the challenges you may have. Typical issues that innovators face is how we break the testbed cycle. Because of the variance in healthcare up and down the country and even within a particular region, we find that health systems are often require testbeds or pilots in order to validate the impacts that you claim. Unfortunately, because of the typical nature of healthcare and the siloed workforce, and ultimately the democratized multi-stakeholder selling that you'll have to do, these test beds don't result in lots of adoption. And in fact, they do contribute towards the familiar valley of death that innovators go through when they enter a new market where they're trying to develop traction. Because there is no single point of procurement, and actually it is a decentralized procurement process, it's difficult to scale through an individual contract. Value propositions and narrative are very important when scaling. Multi-stakeholder selling, other than individual selling, because we are a health system with no underlying currency, i.e. we're not driven necessarily by clinical or financial reward individually. It is a combination of system challenges such as clinical or financial or individual challenges where you may be having to appeal to somebody's ego and so on. We find that in order to convince the health system to adopt your technology, not just at scale, but at an individual instance, we can't rely on the traditional selling techniques, which may be to meet with a clinician, inform them of the capabilities, features and benefits of your product, and expect them to drive a sale through within the health system. We as innovators and as industry need to be engaging not just with the clinician, but with individuals in operations, individuals in management, other healthcare professionals, and ultimately people involved in finance and procurement as well. Because it is a fully publicly funded system, there are what we refer to as checks and balances put in place, which ultimately result in perverse incentives. Procurement teams are incentivized to reduce the amount of cash they spend, and their KPIs, for instance, their key performance indicators, are demonstrating cash savings on list prices of products. That unfortunately leads to situations where people will inflate their prices massively so they can offer larger cash discounts to the health system and therefore create these unnecessary barriers or perverse incentives from within the system that we need to account for as part of our market access strategy. The health system, much like every other industry across the world, has developed their own language, and often as innovators, we struggle to understand how to translate our expectations or our features and benefits of our products into language that the health system will understand. A quick example for you is often within the UK, we don't talk about a return on investment for the health system from the provider's language. We talk about budget impact or cash release. And there are many other examples of that type of thing. It is difficult to enter the health system because it is so varied, and often the pressures with which the health system is burdened means that it's difficult just to walk through the front door to meet with clinicians. We see that traditional methods such as conferences, attending conferences and symposiums are still the number one place to meet with clinicians. But it does make accessing those multiple stakeholders that I described earlier more complicated when moving towards scaled adoption. Within the system, as a result of these multiple budgets, it's also difficult to understand who the user, beneficiary, and payer are. Typically, digital technologies span multiple services in their impact. We may see that the payer doesn't necessarily see the full return on investment because the lifestyle management or lifestyle changes that our digital technology can provide will often result in reduced healthcare utilization across the system. For example, in A&E attendances or primary care visits and so on. There is also a huge amount of pressure on the NHS because it is recognized as a market that offers more than just a financial reward. There are lots of Anglo-centric nations that look to the NHS still, despite some of its challenges and its negative press, for advice and for guidance as to what technology they should be using. That is a debatable point, but it's still valuable in understanding when you tackle the NHS, and the result of which being that everybody wants their technology to be used by the NHS, which means that typical resources delegated to this innovation adoption are stretched and budgets are absolutely stretched. You are typically not just competing against your competitors, but of other draws on that finite financial resource. So, how does the UK support innovation in the face of all of these challenges? Well, it's developed an innovation ecosystem that is designed to support innovators in tackling this. The infrastructure is comprised of multiple institutes, and they all help with varying degrees of innovation or various types of innovation. And in order to explain to you how they support, I'm going to just do a quick recap of what we consider healthcare innovation. It is, of course, a new gadget, new drug, or new device, digital therapeutic or diagnostic, but it's also a new way of working, a new patient pathway that may be designed, some sort of preventative interventions which may occur at school, primary school level and so on, as well as education. These innovations can be incremental and disruptive, and can be from a varying background, from clinicians, non-clinicians, academics, inventors, SMEs, multinationals and startups, and so on. The UK innovation ecosystem is typically designed to offer a front door for all of these types of innovation. Why? Just to reconfirm, because of the complexity of variables that exist within healthcare provision, i.e., people, their individual needs plus their system challenges, the appropriate systems that facilitate function across the healthcare service, assets, budgets, diseases, the typical politics that we see. The NHS, just to note, is a particularly hot topic in UK politics and is often used as an incentive or a disincentive for incoming and outgoing political parties. And because of that, it's often unstable at certain political times. There are perverse incentives, as already mentioned. There is typically a lack of skills around innovation, adoption, and strategy. There is, of course, always a lack of capacity and money. And industry, or from our perspective, often don't know how to understand or solve these problems because the health system is typically poor in articulating it. So what we often do is end up solving problems from an individualistic perspective or a myopic view rather than a multi-stakeholder perspective, which is what we really need to do. Because of this, often products fail, which is why we need to have a robust strategy to overcome this. What does the UK consider as good innovation? Well, it needs to be an improvement. There needs to be an improvement in quality, clinical, of course. There needs to be a budget impact or a return on investment. And most importantly, at this stage, is it needs to improve access and efficiency, i.e. it shouldn't create additional bottlenecks in existing pathways. Because there is a lack of financial resource, and I should mention, typical budgets or typical review on return on investment for any good technology needs to show an in-year financial return, which, as we know from an innovator's perspective, is very difficult. So do bear that in mind. It's going to be a complex value proposition if you're showing multi-year returns. With this in mind, the UK innovation ecosystem is set up as such that there are services that exist around the definition of need, the support around the development of idea, evidence generation, which plays a key role in market access within the UK, particularly for spread and adoption, which is the final balloon you see at the end here, where we want scaled adoption. And there are services that support market access. There's lots of online resources from institutes like the King's Fund or the Academic Health Science Network, now renamed the Health Innovation Network, HIN. There are masterclasses provided by these institutes and organizations, and there are particular services, face-to-face services provided by them too. Consultation is, of course, a familiar offer globally, but there are some UK-funded consultation offers as well. How do these present themselves? As accelerators and incubators, which you'll all be familiar with, through grant funding. The UK provides lots of grant funding for innovators wishing to generate intellectual property in the UK, but also evidence for the adoption of their technology. There's lots of research facilities and labs. There is lots of scale space built into the academic institutes and research facilities. We have health hub co-working spaces that are parts of the NHS infrastructure. For instance, we have a charity set up at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital that provide a landing spot for innovators to become more integrated within the health system. And we have the ICS, the Integrated Care System, who publishes need at a high level and is there to facilitate these multi-year budget impact evaluations, or to recognize the evidence that you produce in order to demonstrate a system-wide impact because of your technology and support the adoption of your technology when it straddles multiple different budgets and service lines. So going through all of these offers or navigating all of the UK sort of innovation ecosystem, which is something that you can spend a lifetime doing. The question you'll ask yourself at one point is that, is it worth it? Is it worth engaging with the health innovation networks, who are a triage or front door for the NHS, who will assess innovation and then try and facilitate entry into the market? Well, as like most political answers, yes and no. They're useful, all of the services provided by the NHS, but you have to accept that timing is a very important factor, and that adoption of your product, so the stickiness and the adoption of your product, is not part of the support offer. That is still part, or that is still considered the innovator's responsibility. Now, what impact does this have? Timing, first of all. The innovation ecosystem that supports technology in the UK is another politically motivated set of organizations. They are typically measured on process rather than outcome. Therefore, having you adopted by a NHS trust is not as valuable as just having had a chat or a conversation with you. So be wary as you engage that they will be wanting to, they will show lots of engagement, enthusiasm, but it doesn't necessarily, and not always, I should caveat, doesn't necessarily translate into the adoption of your product. So please be wary of that. Although they are fantastic services, if you have developed a value proposition that is already resonating and you're now looking for scaled adoption, not your initial deployment into the health system. Because adoption is not part of the support, what we find is that being able to organize pilots and being able to organize introductions for you into the health system is a step in the right direction, but not necessarily a constructive step. Adoption within the UK is predicated on value propositions, and value propositions within the NHS need to be heavily supported by evidence. Why? Because it is a publicly funded system that has a lack of skills around the adoption of innovation and strategic thought process. It is predominantly focused, of course, on healthcare provision, not on business in inverted commas. We see that there is a cultural fear of change and a cultural resistance towards the adoption of new interventions, which cannot be overcome by the current ecosystem. So you'll now be asking yourself, well, is there any point? Well, yes, there is. The UK health system can offer lots of value as long as you have an appropriate strategy to mitigate against these variables. These are variables that you can account for. You need a robust ledger in economic terms that helps you account for perverse incentives, complexity of procurement, for instance, but also individual challenges, needs, system expectations, evidence expectations, and conflicting budgets. What do these strategies look like? Well, we bucket them at a high level into traditional and non-traditional market access. What is traditional? Well, traditional market access is sales teams led, which is what you'll all be familiar with. It is where we deploy individuals onto the ground and we ask them to go and adopt the usual process of engaging with clinicians, building relationships within health systems, and then explaining how the features and benefits of a product could align with those multiple stakeholders' values. Of course, the challenge in this is access. So time is a real consideration here. If you want to pursue a traditional market access strategy, you should know that it typically takes between 18 months and 2.5 years to secure your first sale with one site at a particular point in the system. And that is if you've already identified your budget holder. Why? Well, because if you engage with the clinician, for instance, as a starting point or a landing point, you can typically then gain access into the hospital or to the primary care facility where you wish to demonstrate your product. At that point, rather than being able to rely on the clinician to help you understand who else you need to speak to, you'll need to navigate and understand how the impact of your technology is affecting different stakeholders from within the particular pathway that you're addressing day-to-day activity. So what does that really look like? You go and meet the clinician, you end up having a chat with a nurse or an operator manager, figuring out if the features and benefits of your product might be beneficial to them. You then end up eventually meeting an operations manager and an administrator and eventually a budget holder. All of this can take a lot of time and you won't often get support from colleagues within the NHS for two reasons. One, they work in silos and don't understand what their colleagues are going through and what their own individual incentives are and what their system incentives are. And two, lines of communication within the NHS are extremely stretched due to a lack of money and people capacity. So you will have to take responsibility for doing it. What's the value in doing this then? Well, you get lots of on-the-ground information. You build a great identity and a good public profile with the health system as you pursue this. And you also get lots of knowledge to help you understand how to augment your product or develop new products. The problem, of course, associated with this is scale. How many salespeople can you hire in order to tackle the multiple stakeholders up and down the country? Because as we've seen, we're decentralized budgets. Each region has its own budget. And how much time can you afford them before they start getting money in? We see, of course, that is very difficult for startups. It's much easier for large multinationals that have lots of money to burn through. So we need to find a more efficient way of doing this. And that's where we start to think about non-traditional market access. Non-traditional market access, rather than being sales teams focused, is evidence focused. Evidence falls into three buckets, as mentioned before, of what good innovation looks like: clinical evidence, financial evidence, and human factors evidence. Human factors evidence isn't just the ergonomics of your product, it's the impact it has when deployed on the system and the humans within the system. Understanding if you're going to create fear of change or if people are going to be supportive is important to know early on. In order to justify why you need evidence, there is a list here that helps you understand what it can help you bypass. Well, if you are going to enter into a test bed and a pilot, you'll need a benchmark. Rather than typically walking in and saying, would you like to try this product, as you would do in a traditional market access strategy, and then asking the individuals to assess this themselves and see if it's beneficial to them, what you really want to be doing is telling the system, if you adopt this product, as you will see through the test, you will achieve this clinical outcome, this financial outcome, and this human factors outcome. Why are you doing that? Because of a lack of skills within the health system. They won't know what metrics to measure in order to justify procuring, i.e. handing over money to you, your product, if you don't have a bed to move forward. It helps us align multiple stakeholders. If we have evidence to support not just the impact to the clinician, but also to the administrator, the operations manager, the CFO, the CEO, and the other stakeholders potentially impacted by your technology, we're more able to quickly align those stakeholders rather than having to jump from individual to individual and have multiple conversations. What does this do? It shortens sales cycles, of course. It moves from a typically 1.5 year to 2.5 year sales cycle down to 3 to 6 months, which is a lot more palatable. And it de-risks that fearful culture of change. What we see is that with evidence produced by a good agnostic organization like a good academic institute, Imperial College or Oxford or the National Institute for Health and Care Research, the health system is more comfortable in handing over responsibility for that procurement. What do I mean by that? Well, if something goes wrong and they have been procured based on, let's say, your own homework, the own evidence that you've put forward, then that individual that's made the procurement decision is going to be held responsible, and they're going to ask why they believed an organization that is doing their own homework, in inverted commas, is to be believed. If you use an agnostic academic organization for your evidence, then there is a feeling of respect and authority to those organizations, and therefore the expectation of impact clinically, financially, and human factors wise can be trusted. And if something does go wrong, it can be assumed that the academics missed a particular component, but nobody will be held responsible for that. It also helps us adopt at scale, because if we're producing evidence for large budget holders, i.e. further and further up the chain, potentially at the ICS, they're going to want to be even more de-risked, and it's very unlikely that they'll believe the value propositions or be able to tie the features and benefits of your product to a particular value without agnostic evidence being produced in your favor. And it also helps us identify what budget holders we want to go to if we're generating appropriate evidence. So, a recap, why do we need evidence? Well, for sales, because if we're generating this evidence, we're going to make our salespeople more proficient, but we're also going to be gaining access to the health system through that innovation ecosystem. With appropriate evidence, we are no longer relying on the innovation ecosystem to introduce us to people to sell. We can now use the innovation ecosystem to transmit or communicate a business case designed through evidence directly to the customer, which removes the technology partner from the loop, therefore changing it from a supply forcing mechanism, traditional sales, to a demand creation process where we're using agnostic evidence to demonstrate the value of our product directly to the health system, hopefully creating inbound opportunities for us. We need evidence for regulatory approval, and I'm going to do a quick overview as to what the expectations are for digital organizations in entering the UK market. We also need to we use evidence to inform the provider and give them confidence, i.e. remove the decision risk from them. When, as I've already mentioned, we use it to create testbed opportunities for us for spread and adoption. What types of evidence are there? I'm sure you guys are all familiar with this, quantitative and qualitative. They fall into 3 buckets: clinical, financial, and human factors. We have, like all science, modeled evidence and real world evidence. Modeled evidence is a great way of quickly validating your technology and improving your traditional sales cycles, i.e. We don't need to always think about doing randomized control trials or long prospective studies in order to generate evidence. There are quick evaluation methodologies that are developed by multiple institutes that will validate your existing claims based on existing data. How do you make your evidence stand out? Well, don't do your own homework. Make sure that you use a good, reputable third party that the health system has trust in. Spread and adoption. How do you convert a few successful adoption cases into national or system-wide adoption? Well, what we do is we use the opportunity and the evidence we generate at those local sites in order to develop business cases that can be accepted by some mechanisms that I'm about to explain to you. So our assumption, or my assumption, is that if you go through the process of both traditional and non-traditional market access, you will have at some point developed some evidence, and that will have got you to a point of your first few deployments within the health system. So what that typically looks like is that you will have modeled some evidence with an agnostic organization. You'll have taken that to one or two sites and started to validate your claims in pilots and test beds, and then move through to procurement with them. So that is your social proof. Now, in order for you to get system-wide scale and adoption, what we need to do is consider your model or your hypothesis as a way of indicating to the health system that no matter where they sit on the bell curve, and the bell curve represents variance in healthcare, i.e. the way in which healthcare is delivered in rural England will differ from that of central London. So no matter how they've established and set up their health system, your technology, when deployed, will have a positive impact clinically, financially, and human factors wise. If in our modeled evidence we can demonstrate a broad bell curve, what we want to do is validate in the real world multiple, let's say, experiments to our hypothesis. Excuse me. So like a scientific experiment, if we have a hypothesis, i.e. our model, we want to create several experiment environments that represent different points on that bell curve, i.e. central London or rural England. What we want to demonstrate is that our claims in our model, when achieved, are achieved, each time we deploy, no matter where you are in the country. Why do we do this? We do this because if we go and do a test or a pilot in a particular site in the UK, let's say central London, you will find that taking that evidence from that pilot and that test, even to the neighbour of that hospital or to another city in the UK, will mostly be met with a common phrase. Well, we are not like them. We need you to do the test again here. And you can't keep doing that if you wish to scale quickly. In order to bypass that, what you need to do is run several experiments, again, using a good academic authority to capture real world evidence that demonstrates that no matter where you are on the provision bell curve, your technology will have a net positive impact. You then need agents of authority, and you need to be part of appropriate supply frameworks. So a slightly separate point to the one I've just made before. In order to access UK markets, you do not need to be on a single supply chain, nor in the case of digital technologies, other than with DTAC, which is the digital technology assessment criteria, or with GDPR, have to have met any other regulatory approval. If you wish to sell, you're going to need some sort of CE/CA mark. If you are selling a medical device, and if you wish to sell directly to the health system, although Class 1 medical devices can be self-certified. So it's worth considering what you need to achieve in order to convince the health system that you are a safe and secure product. There are multiple supply frameworks, procurement frameworks within the UK. None of them guarantee sales. You still have to do your own sales work. What they do is remove friction at the point of procurement because they have pre-populated business cases for the expense that you'll outline. And they also guarantee the NHS that there is a standardized price. but none of them are absolutely needed in order to sell. You can tackle individual budgets as you wish, and which a lot of companies do, just to validate their product in the early stages. A quick note on agents of authority. When you've generated all of this evidence, whether it's modeled or real world, you will need to think about how you communicate that evidence. Your first line of attack, of course, will always be your salespeople, but as with other health systems, you'll want key opinion leaders or clinical advisory groups or communities of interest to be channeling the information that you create and the evidence that you create. Some examples of techniques for spread and adoption at scale. Innovation forums, so being part of the innovation ecosystem will give you access to pre-organized events where you can meet buyers of your technology, but you'll need your evidence to be in place before then. You can join recognized accelerators like the National Innovation Accelerator or some of the other institutional accelerators like Chelsea and Westminster's one. You can rely on internal champions or healthcare navigators, so you'll want good academics or clinicians talking about your product regularly. These are things that I'm sure you're all familiar with, but just to reiterate, these strategies can be used in the UK as well. The health innovation networks are key if you've generated your evidence at the right time, and I've already articulated why, because you'll be able to use them as a marketing and a communication channel. And then particular procurement frameworks, which will give you some visibility. Now, the last point, the rapid uptake products and the accelerated access collaborative are worth noting at this point. You'll all be familiar with the organization NICE, I'm sure. NICE produce a list of validated products. Unfortunately, NICE's catalogue of 2,500 innovations, which spans drug, med devices, and so on, have not been adopted at the scale that you would expect. In fact, some reports say that only around 7% of NICE's products are adopted at scale by the NHS. And this has been a recognized issue by by an organization called the Accelerated Access Collaborative. In order to standardize healthcare and improve quality, we really should be adopting more NICE products, NICE recommended products. We don't, because of decentralized budgets and perverse incentives, as well as localized culture and management philosophies. So what I'm saying really here is clinical preference potentially interfering with what, potentially influencing a positive change and remaining as the status quo and not facilitating change. The Accelerated Access Collaborative, in recognizing this, decided that what they would do is choose a selection of products every year that met a certain evidence criteria. So the type of evidence criteria that I've been describing to you, modeled plus real world evidence in 3 buckets. When I say real world evidence, just to be clear, I don't mean randomized control trials. I do mean real world evidence. There is no need for multi-year prospective studies. These can be a lot shorter, but I can answer those questions separately at another time. The Accelerated Access Collaborative now looks at products that have reached a particular evidential standard and now categorizes them as rapid uptake products. And in doing so, which would be an ambition I recommend of all organizations that wish to enter the UK, you then get specific funding allocated to the adoption of these products. And it is not just funding to procure the product, but it is funding provided by NHS England to activate the 400 or 500 people that work for the Health Innovation Network, the purple bar you see in front of you, to go and sell and force the adoption of your product within the particular geography that they look at. Now, just to make that clear, Health Innovation Network is 15 organizations up and down the country that offer support to innovators. The other function that they offer, which relates back to the timing point I made, is that if you do achieve rapid uptake product status, they will act as your sales team. And in achieving that, you get 15 organizations that will typically deploy 3 or 4 people in their geography to go and sell your product and guarantee uptake with a pot of money already available to procure your product. That is a long journey in order to get to that stage, but it should be an ambition of every organization for national spread. particularly if they're going to enter and utilize the non-traditional market access strategies. So a quick recap in our last few minutes, and then save a bit of time for questions and answers, for any questions you may have. We need to review the essential components to successful market entry into the UK. You'll need to engage with some academia or research bodies. You'll need to understand regulatory bodies. Have you already not classified your medical device? You'll need to be familiar with the legal entities within the NHS. So be familiar with the fact that primary care, despite it being a national service, is made up of 6,000 individual small businesses, which are the family doctors that we go to sell to, that are funded directly by the NHS. We've got different types of funding that you can tap into. Grant funding in particular for research is something that I'd urge you all to consider. The payer is different for primary, secondary and tertiary care providers, but with the emergence of the ICS, there is a central pot that we can tackle. A quick note on the ICSs: they are currently being bombarded with innovation, and they are yet to form themselves into coherent and well-functioning organizations. At this stage, it would be best to look at a top-down and bottom-up approach to the UK market. You should be engaging with clinicians, you should be engaging with different levels of the health system, but you should also be having conversations with the ICS around the impacts that your technology will have, particularly if they are broad and straddle both primary, secondary and tertiary care. You need to be wary that there are plenty of business and clinical mentors within the UK, and you should really leverage them. There's lots of individuals like myself that are happy to be part of organizations, because we recognize that the challenges within the UK cannot be overcome without industry and innovators' support. And if we want a health system that is robust for the future, we will need to leverage whatever social capital we have and whatever insights we have in order to support you in changing our health system. You'll need to be familiar with what research and evidence you'll need to have. And it varies depending on who you're selling to. If you're selling to an individual GP, the evidence threshold and expectation will be much lower than if you're selling to an ICS, predominantly because your contract sizes will be different, but also because the impact of your technology on patients will be at a smaller scale at a GP, general practitioner or family doctor level, whereas at the ICS, where you're typically challenging 2.5 million people's worth of population, evidence is going to need to be more robust. And then also be familiar with the NHS innovation agencies, such as their health innovation networks, in order to help you push your technology. So if we are successful in entering the UK market with a traditional and non-traditional market access approach, and we have developed evidence locally, or we've managed to scale through clever marketing and sales capabilities, the value goes beyond just the financial reward of the UK system. As I mentioned at the very start of the presentation, lots of the Middle East, as mentioned by Lisa at the very start, the UAE are very Anglo-centric in their thought process, predominantly because the UK, up until a few years ago, pre-COVID, still represented very good value for money in terms of healthcare provision. As a representation of GDP, our outcomes still ranked amongst the highest in the world for, I think, an expense of 6 or 7% of our GDP. And that has maintained a healthy relationship with non-competing friendly markets. If we can validate within the UK a product, even if it's just getting adoption within 10% of the UK, being able to leverage that globally has lots of impact on your future business and your expansion. That said, as an Englishman, I should say that my ambition is to help all industry enter the UK, because I know technology is going to be the answer to lots of the problems that we're suffering, and there needs to be a cultural shift within the UK. That can only happen if we stop selling as we did in the past, based on sales techniques, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and we move towards a more evidence-led market access strategy, which de-risks and gives confidence back to the health system that if they go through change and they do adopt innovation, that they will and can create an NHS of the future that will be sustainable. So at that point, I'll stop and I will pause to see if there are any questions that anybody wishes to ask. And if none of that made any sense, then please feel free to challenge me on any points. Very happy to have a discussion. Sorry, Lisa, you're still on mute.
Yes, so now it's working. Thanks, Omar, for this interesting insights. It was really quite a full presentation, loads of information, but I hope they will help them. So, dear participants, as Omar already said, now it's time to answer your individual questions. Please write them either into the chat, or if you want, switch on your camera and mic. We will answer them one after the other.
Hi, good morning, Omar. I'm not
Good
sure
morning,
if,
Eduardo.
I could line up to be the first one. I'm never sure to ask questions, so
Thank you,
Thank
please.
two separate questions, actually. As a quick background, we develop computational psychiatry too, so we help psychiatrists to reach a diagnosis and monitoring of patients. That's essentially what we do. I'll get into nitty-gritty details. Two questions. Some of our research, we publish many scientific papers, okay? Some of them, especially one in particular, it's one of the most important ones, it was a research clinical trial done with King's College researchers. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Which basically they say, the abstract basically says it works. It's amazing. Okay.
Fabulous.
Okay. That's basically what professors, two professors from King's College, put their name on the bottom of the paper. Question one: is this what do you call a sufficient kind of research? Okay. And second question is that if we need to incorporate in the UK to have access to that possibility of, rendering services. Thank you.
Yes, fine. So first question, is it enough? I'd have to see the research paper. Clinically, it sounds like it is. Was there a health economics component to that paper? And was there a human factors component to that paper is the question I put back.
Yes. They took patients.
Yes.
They took a first-time patient in a clinic in South London.
Yes, Slam.
Basically,
Yes.
I think 20 patients, right? And basically, they did our protocol and they did their normal protocol, and they followed up this patient for several years. Several years later, they can really confirm who had a schizophrenic psychotic event, who was diagnosed as a schizophrenic patient, and compared to our results, which came in the first day. And basically, we got 95% right on the positive ones. Yes, this gentleman is likely to become a patient. And the negative ones, this patient's not likely to become a patient. So basically, we got 100% right, to make it simple. Okay?
Fine. So I would say to you, just in order of time, that sounds clinically great, but did you model what impact that has financially? Do you understand how in diagnosing those patients early, you were able to reduce healthcare utilization and then take costs out of the system? Great. What you also need to understand from that is that are there any perverse incentives in changing that pathway? Will the healthcare trust lose money? Therefore, may they put a barrier up? So that's a human factor. Or is it going to create an administrative burden at the very start that needs to be surfaced early in order to be accounted for? I'm very happy to continue this individual discussion with you at any point. Do you need to be incorporated into the UK? No, not to sell. But if you want to raise grant funding, then you will. Only for grant funding, then you'll need to be incorporated into the UK.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Omar. And I'll
Pleasure.
follow up with you later.
Pleasure. Please reach out if you'd like a further chat.
Thank you.
Any other questions? It means I've either done a terrible job or a really good job, but I'm not quite sure. I can only see two faces, so I'm hoping it's not been awful.
Now you see another face.
Oh, thank you, Thomas.
Actually, I mean, I have listened to a lot of this kind of talks, and this was one of the more valuable ones. So thank you for that. We are not as far in the process that we would enter the UK anytime soon, but can I hire you once we are there?
With pleasure, always available. Can't say no to business. That's for certain.
Okay, good. Okay, so now you have an affiliation with King's Colleges, if I understand correctly.
Yeah,
or...
so I'm linked with several universities. I'm a lecturer at Imperial, University College London, and at King's College, where I educate on market access for devices.
Okay.
It's the topic of my PhD, so it keeps me busy.
Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Well, that was more of a proposition than a question, which is fantastic for me. So I'm not going to complain. Please, I'm happy to have a chat at any point anyway, just to understand where you are. So feel free to reach out.
I'll connect via LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, with sort of Any other questions? Klaus, I see you've popped up. I'm not sure if you want to ask a question or not. No, maybe not.
Omar,
Yeah,
I
I want to ask a
Sorry, go
question.
ahead. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
We already registered in the UK. We are an MDR Class 2A product, and we
Yes.
have our certification for UK. What we did is an economical model.
Yes.
What our app, or an economical model about the impact that our app can have on the health system for Germany.
Yes. Yes.
So
Understood.
the DMAC in Germany did this calculations and this forecast. And is this possible to take this kind of model to take it to the UK? Because for skin cancer, the numbers are nearly the same, and
Yes,
also the population is like.
So I'll give you the quick answer. Unfortunately, not. No.
Okay.
Because of the way healthcare is provided in the UK, it means that the resources and the way that the system is built around that disease will vary from that in Germany, and therefore the implications of the business model will change. So I'm afraid not, but happy to again explain more to all of you on this in particular detail around evidence. Very happy to have follow-up conversations. Karin, I believe you had a question, I think.
Yes, it's a more general one.
Please.
Omar, we have many companies in the field of digital health.
Yes.
Are there any specific recommendations you can give to them when entering the UK market? Is there anything else they need to do?
So to be very honest with you, and I know this was a major component, there is no standardization around digital technology in the UK, which is good in some respects and bad in the others. The only necessary compliance you need to have when engaging with the UK health system is DTAC, which is a phrase that you'll be able to Google. It's the Digital Technology Assessment Criteria, and you'll need to be GDPR compliant, dependent on what type of technology you have. Aside from that, everything else for standard medical device supplies, you'll need a CE or a CA mark, of course, and an appropriate classification. Why is this the case? Well, unfortunately, the UK is a bit behind. I don't mean to sound very negative about the UK. I mean to sound realistic about it as a market. There is lots of opportunities, but you need to be well prepared for it. You need to be able to account for the variables, which is what I've said multiple times. In order to enter the UK market, because it is currently unstructured, there is an opportunity to get early wins where people are forward thinking, but that means you'll need people on the ground in order to find out where those opportunities are. If you want a standardized process for market entry for digital devices, there isn't one yet. There are organizations like Orca who are creating app libraries, but they are still not mandated or recommended by the NHS. There is a lack of cohesion around this area, which is a shame, but it will eventually emerge, and then hopefully I can do another talk for you in the future if we do get somewhere where there is some sort of standardization in the UK.
Can you say again the name of this online library?
Orca, like the type of whale. Orca.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Not at all. A pleasure. Any other questions, Miriam? I'm sorry, Miriam, I don't hear you. You are off mute, but I don't hear you, I'm afraid. Do you want to type it in the chat, perhaps?
Yeah, no.
Yes, we have you. Yes, we do have you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My answer is, how can I process to this transformation medical device EMA approval into compliance with the UK regulations? Because I don't find anything in Google.
So do you have a current set of CE marks and a medical device classification?
Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, for the time being, these are all still acceptable within the UK for two reasons. One, although we left Europe during Brexit, we were unable to establish our own authorities quickly, a failure of the UK. And two, there is such a backlog in our existing standards agencies that they simply would collapse if they didn't allow already validated products coming in. The only exceptions to this are medical devices coming from the US where they have FDA approval. There are fast track services in the UK to help you transform, but if you have a European classification, you are still appropriately valid in the UK.
Okay, so in the market, EMA don't support us. EMA, European Medicinal Agency.
Sorry, I'm not quite following. So
because the medical device in European, it's
yes,
not necessary for
the Middle East
of the market.
Say that last bit again. It's not necessary for the
entering the market.
You do need that to enter the UK market. You'll need a CE mark or a class or a medical device classification. Definitely, you'll need that in order to enter. If you are selling to the health system, if it is a B2C, a business to consumer technology, then no. Then it is just simply a case of consumer classification, and even then, that's debatable from a digital device perspective.
Okay. Thank you.
Not at all. Any other questions from anybody? No. Oh yes.
Sir,
yes.
May I ask you
if
we have medical device certification in US?
Yes.
It's okay to go to UK market with this certification.
No, you'll have to go. You'll have to resubmit for a European classification, a European or a UK classification. Now, luckily, if you've gone through the process of a medical US medical device classification, it's simply a case of resubmitting your dossier with a few tweaks. There is some guidance, but what we do have here is the British Standards Institute and the MHRA. They offer lots of innovator services and they have account managers. You can create a relationship with them and then you can engage with them and they will inform you as to what you expect. There's lots of private organizations within the UK that will also submit your dossier for you on your behalf and tackle all of the challenges as well that may come from it. But in order to sell in the UK, you'll need some European or UK classification, not FDA.
I understand. Thank you.
Unless there's any more, then I will re-extend any hand of offer, free of charge, of course. This is just an opportunity to have a discussion with lots of people. There is no commitment from anybody. Very happy to have a chat with all of you and pick up your individual needs or perspectives. And then if I can advise you, I'm very happy to do so. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or directly through email, which I believe Lisa has. And if she wants to share them, then please do.
Thank you so much. It was really interesting and a fruitful discussion and a lot of questions, which makes me very happy. So once again, thanks a lot, Omar, and thanks everybody else, of course, for your interest and active participation. Yes, this leaves me with the goodbyes. Have a nice rest of the day. And I hope to see you again soon, maybe at our desired trade mission directly in the UK or at another webinar of ours. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.